The crimson sun hung low over the rugged Nevada horizon as Francesca Dawson clutched her side, each breath sending waves of agony through her battered ribs. Blood trickled down her temple, matting her chestnut hair to her skin as she dragged herself forward, one painful inch at a time along the dusty trail that led to nowhere. It was 1876, and the promise of a new life in the West had turned into a nightmare for the 24-year-old schoolteacher from Boston. 3 days ago, the stagecoach carrying her to Kingston, Nevada, had been ambushed by a gang of outlaws. The driver and 2 male passengers had been killed outright. The elderly woman traveling with them had suffered a heart attack during the chaos. And Francesca, they'd kept her alive for their amusement until she managed to escape during the night while they were drunk on whiskey and self-satisfaction. Now she was going to die alone in the wilderness. She was certain of it. Her mouth was parched, her skin burned from the relentless sun, and every movement sent fresh agony through her broken body. The gang had been thorough in their cruelty. "Water," she whispered, her voice hardly more than a rasp as she collapsed face first onto the dirt trail. The world around her began to dim, shadows creeping in from the corners of her vision. In her delirium, she thought she heard hoofbeats, but that was surely the sound of death approaching. Zachary Montero pulled back on his stallion's reins, his eyes narrowing at the dark shape on the trail ahead. At first, he thought it might be a dead coyote or perhaps discarded clothing, but as he drew closer, he could make out the unmistakable form of a woman. "Whoa, Shadow," he murmured to his horse, dismounting swiftly and approaching with caution. Out here in Nevada territory, 20 miles from Kingston, a body on the trail could mean many things, none of them good. The woman lay face down, her dress torn and bloodied, her breathing shallow. Zach knelt beside her, gently turning her over. Her face was a map of bruises, one eye swollen shut, dried blood crusted at the corner of her split lip, but she was alive. "Madam," he said softly, reaching for his canteen. "Can you hear me?" Francesca felt rough hands on her shoulders and instinctively lashed out, a pitiful, weak movement that barely disturbed the dust beneath her. "No," she whimpered. "Please, no more. You're safe now," a deep voice assured her. "I'm not going to hurt you." Cool water touched her cracked lips, and she drank greedily, coughing and sputtering. "Easy now," the voice cautioned. "Too much at once will make you sick." Francesca forced her one good eye open and found herself looking up at a weathered face framed by dark hair. A man with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of storm clouds gazed down at her with concern etched into every line of his face. He wasn't one of them, the outlaws who had taken everything from her. This man's face was hard, yes, but not cruel. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper. "Name's Zachary Montero. Most folks call me Zach. I run a small ranch outside of Kingston." He glanced up and down the trail, his expression darkening. "Who did this to you?" "Men," she said simply, tears welling in her eyes. "5 of them. They attacked the stagecoach, killed everyone else." Zach's jaw tightened. "The Blackwell gang," he said grimly. "They've been terrorizing this area for months now." Francesca tried to sit up but fell back with a cry of pain. "Don't try to move," Zach said quickly, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've got broken ribs from the look of it, and who knows what else. We need to get you to town to Doc Miller." "I don't think I can ride," Francesca said, panic rising in her voice. "You won't have to," Zach assured her. He disappeared from her view for a moment, then returned with a blanket. "I'm going to move you onto this, make a travois to pull behind Shadow. It'll be rough going, but it's better than staying out here." As he worked, fashioning a makeshift stretcher from branches and the blanket, Zach kept talking to her in that calm, deep voice. "What's your name, madam?" "Francesca," she replied weakly. "Francesca Dawson. I was coming to Kingston to teach at the school. Zach nodded as he worked. We've been waiting for you. Town's been without a proper teacher since Mrs. Holloway passed last winter. The knowledge that she had been expected, that there were people waiting for her, brought fresh tears to Francesca's eyes. She had left everything behind in Boston, a comfortable life, but one that held too many painful memories after her father's death and her fiancé's betrayal. The teaching position in Kingston had seemed like a godsend, a chance to start over where no one knew her or her past. Now here she was, broken and humiliated, being rescued by a rugged cowboy who looked at her with a mixture of compassion and cold fury, the latter directed not at her, she realized, but at the men who had hurt her. "I'm going to lift you now," Zach warned her. "It's going to hurt, and I'm sorry for that, but we need to get moving before dark." Despite his size and obvious strength, Zach's touch was gentle as he slid his arms beneath her and lifted her onto the travois. Still, Francesca couldn't suppress a cry of pain as her battered body protested the movement. "I'm sorry," he murmured, genuine regret in his voice. "Not your fault," she managed through gritted teeth. Zach secured her to the travois with strips of leather, making sure she wouldn't roll off during the journey. Then he mounted his horse and urged Shadow forward at a slow, steady pace that minimized the jostling of the travois as much as possible. As they traveled, Francesca drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes she thought she heard Zach talking to her, telling her to hold on, that they were almost there. Other times, she relived the horror of the attack, the leering faces of the men who had delighted in her terror and pain. It was nearly nightfall when they reached Kingston. Through her haze of pain, Francesca was vaguely aware of shouts and exclamations as people gathered around. Strong hands lifted her from the travois, and she was carried into a building that smelled of carbolic acid and herbs. "Good Lord, Zach, what happened to her?" a gruff voice asked. "Blackwell gang," Zach replied tersely. "Found her on the trail about 20 miles out. She says she's the new schoolteacher, Francesca Dawson." "Those bastards," the other man, presumably Doc Miller, muttered. "Set her down here. Martha." He called out, "I need hot water and clean bandages." Francesca felt herself being placed on a firm surface, a bed or examination table. She couldn't tell. Her dress was cut away, causing her to weakly protest. "It's all right, dear," a woman's voice soothed. "I'm Martha Miller, the doctor's wife. We need to see your injuries to help you." "Zach," Francesca called out, suddenly afraid to be left alone with strangers, even well-meaning ones. "I'm right here," his deep voice answered from somewhere nearby. "I won't leave until you're settled." True to his word, Zach remained in the doctor's office as Doc Miller examined Francesca, cataloging her injuries with growing anger. 2 broken ribs, a fractured wrist, severe bruising across most of her body, cuts and abrasions everywhere, and signs of even worse abuse that made Martha Miller weep quietly as she assisted her husband. "She's going to need time to heal," Doc Miller said finally, wiping his hands on a towel. "And somewhere safe to stay. The school has living quarters attached, but they're not ready yet." "She'll stay with me," a woman's voice announced from the doorway. Francesca turned her head slightly to see an older woman with silver-streaked black hair and a kind, weathered face. "I'm Eliza Santos," the woman said, approaching the bed. "I run the boarding house here in Kingston. I've got a nice quiet room that gets the morning sun. It'll be perfect for your recovery, Miss Dawson." "Thank you," Francesca whispered, overwhelmed by the kindness of these strangers. "And I'll find the men who did this," Zach added, his voice hard as flint. "The Blackwell gang has gone too far this time." "Zach," Doc Miller warned, "don't go doing anything foolish. Sheriff Hayes should handle this." Zach's laugh was devoid of humor. "Hayes hasn't done a damn thing about them in months. too afraid to leave town. He looked down at Francesca, his gray eyes intense. "I promise you, Miss Dawson, they'll pay for what they've done." Francesca wanted to tell him no, to beg him not to risk his life for her, a woman he had just met. But darkness was closing in again, and she surrendered to it, too exhausted and in too much pain to fight anymore. When she awoke, she was in a clean, comfortable bed in a small but tidy room. Sunlight streamed through lace curtains, casting dappled patterns on the patchwork quilt that covered her. For a moment, she thought perhaps the whole ordeal had been a nightmare, but when she tried to move, the pain that shot through her body confirmed the terrible reality. The door opened, and Eliza Santos entered carrying a tray. "Ah, you're awake," she said, smiling warmly. "I've brought you some broth and tea. You need to build your strength." Francesca allowed the older woman to help her sit up against the pillows, wincing at the pain in her ribs. "How long have I been asleep?" she asked, her voice still raspy. "Nearly 2 days," Eliza replied, placing the tray across Francesca's lap. "Doc Miller's been by 3 times to check on you, said you needed the rest more than anything. 2 days. Francesca tried to process this as she sipped the hot beef broth, which was rich and flavorful, warming her from the inside. "Mr. Montero," she said suddenly, remembering the cowboy who had found her. "Is he? Zachary left the morning after he brought you in," Eliza said, her expression clouding slightly. "Told me to look after you and that he'd be back as soon as he could." Fear clutched at Francesca's heart. "He's gone after them, hasn't he? The men who attacked me?" Eliza nodded grimly. "Zach's not a man to let such things go unpunished. He's known tragedy himself. Makes him take the suffering of others personally, especially women." "But there were 5 of them," Francesca protested weakly, "and they're killers." "So is Zach when he needs to be," Eliza said quietly. "He fought in the war, you know. Was a scout and a sharpshooter, and before he settled here, he rode with the Texas Rangers for a time." This information should have been reassuring, but it only increased Francesca's anxiety. She had already caused the deaths of those poor people on the stagecoach. If Zachary Montero died trying to avenge her, she didn't think she could bear it. "Please don't worry yourself sick over him," Eliza advised, noting her distress. "Zach knows what he's doing, and he didn't go alone. That young cowhand of his, Tommy Wilson, went with him, and they picked up the sheriff from the next county too. Hayes might be useless, but Sheriff Jenkins from over in Carson County is cut from different cloth." This did provide some small comfort, though Francesca couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over her. She finished her broth in silence, then lay back against the pillows, exhausted from even this small exertion. "You rest now," Eliza said, taking the tray. "I'll check on you in a few hours." As the days passed, Francesca's body slowly began to heal. The bruises faded from angry purple to sickly yellow, the cuts scabbed over, and her broken bones ached less fiercely. Doc Miller visited daily, changing her bandages and checking her progress, always with Martha by his side to maintain propriety. The people of Kingston proved to be kind and supportive. Women from the town brought food and small gifts, books, a hand-knitted shawl, wildflowers in mason jars. They sat with her, sharing gossip and stories of the town's history, trying to distract her from her pain and worry. But there was no news of Zachary Montero or his companions, and with each passing day, Francesca's concern grew. She tried to hide it, not wanting to seem overly attached to a man she had barely met, but Eliza saw through her pretense. "He's special, our Zach," she said one evening as she helped Francesca brush her hair, which was finally clean and shining again after Martha had helped her wash it the day before. "Not just because he's handsome as sin, though there's that too." Despite herself, Francesca blushed. She had been trying not to think about Zach's physical appearance, the broad shoulders, the strong jawline covered in dark stubble, those penetrating gray eyes that seemed to see right through her. "He's been alone too long," Eliza continued, her hands gentle as she worked through a tangle. "Ever since his wife died." "He was married?" Francesca asked, surprised. Eliza nodded. 6 years ago now. Her name was Rebecca. They'd only been married a year when she took ill with fever. Nothing Doc Miller could do. She sighed heavily. Zach was a different man after that. Threw himself into building his ranch. Hardly ever came to town except for supplies. It's only in the last year or so that he started to emerge from his shell. Francesca absorbed this information silently. It explained the sadness she had glimpsed behind his eyes, the gentleness with which he had treated her despite his obvious strength. "I'm not looking to replace his wife," she said finally, feeling the need to clarify her interest. "I'm only concerned for his safety because he risked himself for me, a stranger." Eliza smiled knowingly but didn't press the issue. "Of course, dear. Now, do you think you might be up for sitting on the porch tomorrow? Fresh air would do you good." 2 weeks after Zach had found her on the trail, Francesca was indeed strong enough to sit in a rocking chair on Eliza's wide front porch, a blanket across her lap, despite the warmth of the day. She watched the comings and goings of Kingston with interest, trying to learn about the place that was to be her new home. Kingston was smaller than she had expected, just a single main street with businesses on both sides, a general store, a saloon, a small hotel, the doctor's office, and various other establishments. Beyond that were scattered houses, and in the distance, she could see farms and ranches dotting the landscape. The town was nestled in a valley with mountains rising in the distance, a starkly beautiful setting that was nothing like the crowded streets of Boston. She was so absorbed in her observations that she didn't immediately notice the riders approaching from the east. It was only when people on the street began pointing and calling out that she turned her attention to the 3 men on horseback coming slowly down the main street. Even at a distance, she recognized Zachary Montero's broad-shouldered silhouette. Relief flooded through her, so intense that tears sprang to her eyes. He was alive. As the riders drew closer, she could see that they were trail-worn and dusty. Zach had a bandage wrapped around his left forearm, visible where his shirt sleeve was rolled up. Beside him rode a younger man with sandy hair whom she assumed was Tommy Wilson, and on his other side was an older, mustachioed man wearing a sheriff's badge. The trio stopped outside the sheriff's office, and several townspeople gathered around them, including Sheriff Hayes, who emerged looking decidedly uncomfortable. Francesca couldn't hear what was being said, but she could read the body language. Zach was tense, gesturing forcefully, while Hayes seemed defensive, almost cowering. The other Sheriff, Jenkins, presumably appeared to be mediating, though his posture suggested he was firmly on Zach's side. After a few minutes of heated discussion, the group dispersed. Hayes slunk back into his office and Jenkins followed, but Zach and Tommy remained outside, speaking quietly. Then Zach looked up, his eyes scanning the street until they landed on Eliza's porch on her. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across the distance. Then Zach said something to Tommy, handed him the reins of his horse, and began walking toward the boarding house. Francesca's heart pounded painfully against her broken ribs. She smoothed her hair self-consciously, wishing she were wearing something nicer than the borrowed dress Eliza had loaned her, which was slightly too large and plain compared to the fashionable clothes she had lost in the stagecoach robbery. Zach climbed the steps slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. Up close, she could see the exhaustion etched into his features, the new lines around his mouth, the healing cut above his right eyebrow. "Miss Dawson," he said, removing his hat, "you're looking better." "Mr. Montero," she replied, her voice steadier than she expected, "you're looking worse." A smile cracked through his serious expression, transforming his face completely. "Reckon that's a fair assessment. Your arm, just a graze," he dismissed. "Nothing compared to what you've been through." An awkward silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken questions. "Did you find them?" Francesca finally asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Zach's expression hardened. "Yes. And—" He hesitated, glancing at her bandaged wrist, the fading bruises on her face. "2 are dead. The other 3 are in custody, being transported to Carson City for trial. Sheriff Jenkins is making sure Hayes files the proper reports." Francesca nodded slowly, processing this information. She should have felt relief, satisfaction, even joy at the news that the men who had hurt her would face justice. Instead, she felt oddly hollow, as if vengeance couldn't truly restore what had been taken from her. "I'm sorry," Zach said suddenly. Confused, she looked up at him. "For what?" "For not being able to protect you from this happening in the first place." The absurdity of his statement struck her forcefully. "Mr. Montero, you didn't even know I existed 2 weeks ago. How could you possibly have protected me?" "It's my home," he said simply. "These are my lands, my people, and I let animals like the Blackwell gang terrorize them for too long." His sense of responsibility was both admirable and slightly misguided, Francesca thought. But she understood the guilt of survival, the nagging what-ifs that haunted the mind in the dark hours of the night. "You saved my life," she reminded him gently, "and you risked your own to bring those men to justice. I'd say that more than balances any imagined failure on your part." Zach studied her face, seeming to search for something in her expression. Whatever he saw there made some of the tension leave his shoulders. "May I sit with you a while?" he asked. "Please," she replied, gesturing to the empty rocking chair beside hers. They sat in companionable silence for some time, watching the town go about its business. Francesca found it surprisingly comfortable, being with him without the pressure to fill every moment with conversation. "I was thinking," Zach said eventually, "that you might want to see the school before you start teaching. Once Doc Miller says you're well enough, of course." "I'd like that very much," Francesca agreed. "Though I'm not sure when that will be. My ribs still pain me and this wrist." She held up her splinted arm. "There's time," Zach assured her. "The town council agreed that you should be fully recovered before taking up your duties. Your position and salary are secure." Relief washed over Francesca. She had been worried about her finances, especially since all her savings had been stolen in the robbery. "That's very generous of them." "It's practical," Zach countered. "Kingston needs a good teacher. We're willing to wait for the right one." He paused, a slight flush rising on his cheekbones. "Besides, I may have mentioned that if they didn't show proper consideration to the woman I saved, I might reconsider my annual donation to the school building fund." Francesca's eyes widened. "You didn't?" The corner of Zach's mouth quirked up. "Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. Point is, you don't need to worry about rushing your recovery." She laughed, then winced as the movement jarred her ribs. Zach's expression immediately turned concerned. "You should rest," he said, rising from his chair. "I've tired you out." "No," she protested quickly, not wanting him to leave. "I'm fine, truly." He looked skeptical but settled back into his seat. "If you're sure, but you must promise to tell me if you become fatigued." "I promise," she agreed, touched by his consideration. As the afternoon waned, they talked of simpler things: her journey west, his ranch, the town and its inhabitants. Zach was surprisingly easy to talk to once his initial reserve had thawed. revealing a quick wit and thoughtful nature that drew Francesca in more than she had expected. When Eliza called her in for dinner, Francesca was reluctant for their conversation to end. "Will you come back tomorrow?" she asked impulsively as Zach helped her to her feet. He regarded her with those intense gray eyes, a small smile playing at his lips. "If you'd like me to." "I would," she admitted, holding his gaze despite the warmth rising in her cheeks. "Then I'll be here," he promised, placing his hat back on his head. "Rest well, Miss Dawson." "Francesca," she corrected him. "Please call me Francesca." His smile widened. "Francesca," he repeated, the name sounding different special in his deep voice. "Then you must call me Zach." "Zach," she echoed, liking the feel of his name on her lips. With a tip of his hat, he was gone, striding down the street with that long-legged cowboy gait that was already becoming familiar to her. Inside, Eliza was setting the table, a knowing smile on her face that Francesca pretended not to notice. "Mr. Montero seems to have recovered well from his ordeal," the older woman observed casually. "Yes," Francesca agreed just as casually. "Though he should probably have that arm looked at by Doc Miller. He says it's just a graze, but you can never be too careful with gunshot wounds." Eliza nearly dropped the plate she was holding. Gunshot wound, land sakes that man, always downplaying his injuries. She shook her head in exasperation. "Men," Francesca hid a smile as she lowered herself carefully into a chair at the dinner table. "Indeed." True to his word, Zach returned the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. Sometimes he would bring small gifts, a book from his personal library, wildflowers he had picked on the ride into town, fresh strawberries from a farmer who owed him a favor. Each visit deepened their connection, building a friendship that was rapidly becoming something more, at least on Francesca's part. 3 weeks after her rescue, Doc Miller finally declared her fit enough for short outings. "Nothing strenuous," he cautioned, "and no riding yet. But a gentle walk or a drive in a buggy should be fine as long as you don't overdo it." Zach, who had been present for this pronouncement, immediately suggested showing her the school. "I could bring the buggy around tomorrow if you're feeling up to it." Francesca couldn't hide her eagerness. "I'd like that very much." The next day dawned clear and bright, a perfect late spring day. Francesca took extra care with her appearance, wearing her best borrowed dress, a blue calico that Eliza had taken in slightly to better fit her slender frame, and arranging her hair in a simple but flattering style. Zach arrived precisely at 10 o'clock, driving a well-maintained buggy pulled by a gentle-looking mare. He had dressed up as well, Francesca noticed, wearing a clean shirt with no patches and a vest she hadn't seen before. He had even trimmed his beard. "You look lovely," he said as he helped her into the buggy, his touch lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," she replied, settling onto the padded seat. "You clean up rather well yourself." He chuckled as he climbed in beside her and took up the reins. "Don't get used to it. Usually I'm covered in dust and horsehair." "I'll try to contain my disappointment," she teased, enjoying the easy banter that had developed between them. The school was located at the edge of town, a simple one-room building with a small bell tower and a covered porch across the front. Adjacent to it was a modest cottage that Zach explained would be her living quarters once it was properly prepared. "It needs some work," he admitted as he helped her down from the buggy. "New roof, fresh paint, some repairs to the porch. The inside is in better shape, but it could use a woman's touch." "When will it be ready?" Francesca asked, eager to have her own space despite Eliza's generous hospitality. "Another few weeks, I'd say. I've been helping with the repairs when I can spare time from the ranch." This was news to Francesca. "You've been working on it yourself?" Zach shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. Seemed the least I could do. Besides, I'm good with my hands. The double meaning of his words hung in the air between them, causing Francesca to blush and Zach to clear his throat awkwardly. "Shall we look at the school first?" he suggested, offering his arm. The schoolroom was larger than she had expected, with tall windows that let in plenty of light. Rows of desks faced a teacher's desk on a slightly raised platform, and a large blackboard covered most of the front wall. Bookshelves lined the back of the room, though they were sparsely filled. "The town council has approved funds for new books," Zach explained, noting her examination of the meager library. "And several families have promised donations from their personal collections." "It's wonderful," Francesca said sincerely, running her hand along the smooth surface of the teacher's desk. "How many students will I have?" "About 20, ranging from 6 to 16 years old. Some of the ranch children can only attend during the winter months when there's less work to be done." Francesca nodded, already thinking about how to structure lessons for such a diverse group. It would be challenging, but she was looking forward to it. "Would you like to see the cottage now?" Zach asked. The cottage was indeed in rougher shape than the school, but Francesca could see its potential. It had a small parlor, a kitchen with a decent stove, a bedroom, and a tiny second room that could serve as an office or guest room. The furnishings were basic but serviceable. "The town ladies are organizing a quilting bee to make you some proper bedding," Zach told her as they toured the small space. "And I've ordered a rocking chair for the porch from a carpenter in Carson City. Should be here in time for your move-in." Francesca was touched by these gestures. "Everyone has been so kind. I don't know how I'll ever repay such generosity." "By being the best teacher this town has ever had," Zach said simply. "These people value education. Most of them never had much schooling themselves, but they want better for their children." "I'll do my best," she promised. As they left the cottage, Zach suddenly stopped, turning to face her with an uncharacteristically hesitant expression. "Francesca," he began, then paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I know you're still recovering and you've been through a terrible ordeal, but I was wondering if you might consider. That is, I'd be honored if you would." He trailed off, looking frustrated with himself. "Yes," she prompted gently, her heart racing. "Would you allow me to court you?" He finally asked, the words coming out in a rush. "Properly, I mean, with Eliza's blessing as your temporary guardian, and the understanding that there's no obligation on your part if you find my attentions unwelcome." Joy bubbled up inside Francesca, so intense it almost hurt. "I would like that very much, Zach," she said softly. The smile that spread across his face was like the sun breaking through clouds. "You would?" "Yes," she confirmed, unable to stop her own smile. "Though I should warn you, I'm not very good at being courted. My last attempt ended rather badly." Zach's expression sobered slightly. "The man must have been a fool." "He was," Francesca agreed, thinking of Edward and his betrayal with her supposed friend. "But I'm rather glad of it now. If he hadn't been, I might never have come west, might never have met you." Zach took her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "Then I owe him my gratitude, though I'm sorry for the pain he caused you." He hesitated, then added, "I should tell you that I've been married before." "I know," Francesca said. "Eliza told me about Rebecca." A flicker of sadness passed over his face. "She was a good woman. I loved her very much." "I'm sure you did," Francesca said sincerely. "But it's been 6 years," he continued. "And I've realized lately that it's possible to honor her memory while still allowing myself to care for someone new." His gaze met hers, intense and honest. "To care for you." Francesca's breath caught in her throat. She had not expected such an open declaration so soon. "I care for you too," she admitted. More than I thought possible in such a short time. Zach's hand tightened around hers. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, and despite her lack of experience, she found herself hoping he would. But instead he brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "We'll take things slowly," he promised. "Give you time to fully recover, to settle into your new life here. I'm a patient man, Francesca." Though part of her was disappointed, she appreciated his restraint. They had time, after all. Time to build something solid and lasting, something based on mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than the fleeting passion that had characterized her failed engagement to Edward. "Thank you for showing me the school," she said as they walked back to the buggy. "And for everything else." Zach helped her up into the seat, his strong hands easily lifting her despite her still healing ribs. "My pleasure," he said, and the warmth in his eyes told her he meant it. Over the next few weeks, Zach courted Francesca with a blend of old-fashioned gallantry and practical assistance that endeared him to her more with each passing day. He brought her wildflowers and books, yes, but he also repaired the loose board on Eliza's porch steps and helped haul water for laundry day. As her strength returned, their outings became more adventurous. They picnicked by the creek that ran behind the schoolhouse, where Zach showed her how to skip stones across the water. They attended church services together on Sundays, sitting side by side in a pew while Reverend Parker delivered his sermon. They even went to a dance at the town hall, though Francesca could only manage the slowest waltzes, leaning heavily on Zach's strong arm. Through it all, he was unfailingly patient and considerate, never pushing her beyond her physical limits or pressuring her for more intimacy than the occasional hand holding or kiss on the cheek. It was old-fashioned, perhaps, but Francesca found she appreciated the slow pace. It gave her time to heal not just physically, but emotionally, to regain her confidence after the trauma she had endured. 2 months after her arrival in Kingston, the cottage behind the schoolhouse was finally ready for occupancy. The roof had been replaced, the porch repaired, the interior painted and decorated with simple but attractive furnishings donated by various townspeople. The promised rocking chair sat on the porch, along with a small table and a pot of geraniums that Martha Miller had insisted would brighten the place up. Moving day was a community affair. Despite Francesca's protests that she didn't have many possessions, just the clothes and books she had accumulated during her convalescence, half the town turned out to help. Women brought food, men carried furniture, and children ran excitedly through the rooms, eager to see where their new teacher would live. By mid-afternoon, everything was arranged to Francesca's satisfaction, and Eliza shooed the last of the helpers out the door, leaving Francesca alone in her new home for the first time. She wandered through the small rooms, running her hands over the smooth wooden surfaces, admiring the colorful quilt on her bed, the product of the promised quilting bee, and the curtains that Mrs. Jenkins from the general store had sewn. It wasn't grand or luxurious like her father's house in Boston had been, but it was hers, and that made it perfect. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. She opened it to find Zach standing on her porch, a small wooden box in his hands. "Housewarming gift," he explained, holding it out to her. Francesca invited him in and opened the box at her kitchen table. Inside was a set of carved wooden animals: a bear, a deer, an eagle, a fox, and several others, each no larger than her palm but exquisitely detailed. "Did you make these?" she asked, picking up the bear and examining the careful craftsmanship. Zach nodded, looking slightly embarrassed. "Whittling helps pass the long winter evenings. I thought maybe you could use them in your lessons somehow." "They're beautiful," Francesca said sincerely. The children will love them. Thank you." A comfortable silence fell between them as she arranged the animals on the small shelf above her desk. When she turned back, she found Zach watching her with an intensity that made her heart race. "What is it?" she asked, self-conscious under his scrutiny. He took a step closer, close enough that she could smell the clean scent of soap and leather that always seemed to surround him. "I was just thinking how right you look here, like you belong." "I'm beginning to feel that way too," she admitted. "Kingston is becoming home in a way I didn't expect." "I'm glad," he said softly. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing lightly over the spot where a bruise had once marred her skin. The marks of her ordeal had faded from her body, though the memories would always remain. But they no longer dominated her thoughts or poisoned her dreams the way they once had. She was healing inside and out. "Francesca," Zach murmured, his voice rough with emotion. "May I kiss you?" Instead of answering, she rose up on her toes and pressed her lips to his. It was a gentle kiss at first, tentative on both sides. But when Zach's arms came around her, drawing her closer, the contact deepened, became something more urgent, more profound. Francesca had been kissed before by Edward during their engagement, but never like this, never with this sense of rightness, of coming home. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Zach rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks," he confessed. "Why didn't you?" she asked, genuinely curious. "I needed to be sure you were ready, that you weren't just grateful to me for finding you, for going after those men." His gaze was serious, searching. "I don't want your gratitude, Francesca, I want—" "What?" she prompted when he hesitated. "What do you want, Zach?" "Everything," he said simply. "A future, a family, a life with you by my side." The honesty of his declaration took her breath away. "That's quite a lot to ask after just one kiss," she teased, trying to lighten the moment even as her heart soared at his words. He chuckled, the tension easing from his shoulders. "I did say I was a patient man. I can wait until you're sure." Francesca placed her hand on his cheek, feeling the rough stubble beneath her palm. "What if I'm already sure?" Zach's eyes widened slightly, then darkened with an emotion that sent a thrill through her. "Are you? I think I've been sure since that day at the school when you looked at me and I could see my future in your eyes." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I love you, Zachary Montero." Joy transformed his face, making him look younger, almost boyish. "And I love you, Francesca Dawson, more than I thought possible." He kissed her again, a brief but heartfelt contact. "But I still aim to court you properly. No rushing." Francesca laughed, happiness bubbling up inside her. "Always so proper, Mr. Montero." "Only in some things, Miss Dawson," he replied with a wink that made her blush. The school term began in September, with 23 students ranging from shy 6-year-old Sally Jenkins to gangly 16-year-old Will Peterson, who worked his family's ranch, but had convinced his father to let him attend school through the harvest. Francesca approached her duties with enthusiasm and determination, developing lessons that challenged the older students while still engaging the younger ones. It was exhausting work, but deeply satisfying. Each small victory, Tommy Butler finally mastering his multiplication tables, Rebecca Stevens writing her first complete paragraph, shy Sally volunteering to read aloud filled Francesca with pride and purpose. This was why she had become a teacher, to witness these moments of growth and accomplishment. The people of Kingston quickly embraced their new schoolmistress. Parents invited her to Sunday dinners. Children brought her small gifts of wildflowers or interesting rocks they had found. And the ladies of the town included her in their social gatherings, quilting bees, church socials, and afternoon teas. Through it all, Zach remained her constant, her anchor. Though his ranch kept him busy, especially as autumn progressed and winter preparations began in earnest. He made time to see her several times a week. Sometimes, he would simply stop by the cottage for a cup of coffee and conversation at the end of the school day. Other times, he would take her for drives in his buggy, showing her the beauty of the Nevada landscape as it changed with the seasons. One crisp October afternoon, he surprised her at the schoolhouse just as she was dismissing her students for the day. "Mr. Montero," little Sally exclaimed, spotting him first. "Did you bring Thunder?" Thunder was Zach's stallion, a magnificent black horse that the children adored. Zach sometimes let them pet him when he came to fetch Francesca for their outings. "Not today, Miss Sally," Zach replied, tipping his hat to the child. "Just the buggy. I was hoping your teacher might join me for a ride." 23 pairs of eyes swiveled to Francesca, who felt herself blushing under the scrutiny. "I have papers to grade," she began. "Surely they can wait until tomorrow," Zach suggested, his eyes twinkling. "It's a perfect afternoon for a drive, and I have something special to show you." The children immediately began clamoring for her to go, their enthusiasm infectious. "Go, Miss Dawson. Please say yes." "Mr. Montero's been smiling all day. It must be something good." This last comment came from Tommy Wilson, Zach's young ranch hand, who attended school 3 days a week during the slower season. The boy grinned unrepentantly when Zach shot him a mock stern look. "Well, with such enthusiastic endorsement, how can I refuse?" Francesca laughed, gathering her shawl. "Off with you all now. Remember, I expect those compositions on my favorite season tomorrow." The children scattered, racing off toward their homes, while Francesca locked the schoolhouse door and took Zach's offered arm. "You've planned something," she accused lightly as he helped her into the buggy. "Tommy was right, you do look suspiciously pleased with yourself." "Maybe I'm just happy to see you," Zach suggested, climbing in beside her and taking up the reins. Francesca replied skeptically. "And maybe there's more to it than that." Zach merely smiled enigmatically and urged the horse forward. They rode for about 30 minutes, following a trail that wound through rolling hills covered in sagebrush and scattered pines. As they crested a particularly high ridge, Zach drew the horse to a stop. "There," he said, pointing down into the valley below. "That's what I wanted to show you." Francesca gasped. Nestled in the valley was a small house with a barn and corral, smoke rising lazily from the chimney. A creek ran nearby, its banks lined with cottonwoods whose leaves had turned golden with autumn. Several horses grazed in a fenced pasture, and she could make out a small vegetable garden to one side of the house. "Your ranch," she said, recognizing it from his descriptions, though she had never visited. "It's beautiful, Zach." "It's not much compared to some spreads," he admitted. "Just 100 acres and 40 head of cattle, but the land is good and there's plenty of water year-round from the creek." "Why haven't you brought me here before?" Francesca asked, curious. Zach's expression turned slightly sheepish. "Wanted to get it fixed up first. The house was." "Well, it was a bachelor's house, not fit for a lady's eyes. And now it is," she teased. "See for yourself," he suggested, flicking the reins to start the buggy moving again. As they drew closer to the house, Francesca could see the evidence of recent improvements. The exterior had been freshly painted a warm brown with white trim, flower boxes hung beneath the windows, and the porch boasted a swing large enough for two. Tommy Wilson emerged from the barn as they approached, waving cheerfully before disappearing inside again, tactfully giving them privacy. Zach helped Francesca down from the buggy and led her up the porch steps. He hesitated at the door, suddenly looking nervous. "Before we go in," he said, taking both her hands in his, "I want you to know that there's no pressure. This isn't. That is, I'm not assuming." Zach, Francesca interrupted gently. Just show me your home. He nodded, visibly gathering himself, and opened the door. The interior was simple but welcoming. A stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room with a comfortable-looking sofa and two armchairs arranged before it. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with a surprisingly diverse collection of volumes. The wooden floors were polished to a soft glow and covered in places with colorful rag rugs. Through an open doorway, she could glimpse a kitchen with a large cast-iron stove and a table set with 4 chairs. "It's lovely," Francesca said sincerely, turning to face Zach. "Hardly the bachelor hovel you described. You should have seen it 2 months ago," he said wryly. "I've been working on it every spare moment. New curtains, fresh paint, actual furniture instead of crates and barrels." "Why?" she asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Instead of responding directly, Zach reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Francesca's breath caught in her throat. "I had a whole speech prepared," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "About how from the moment I found you on that trail, something inside me changed. How watching you heal, seeing your strength and courage, made me fall in love with you a little more each day." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold ring set with a small diamond. "But now that I'm standing here, all I can think to say is, Francesca Dawson, will you marry me? Will you make this house a home with me?" Tears blurred Francesca's vision. 6 months ago, she had been attacked, violated, left for dead on a lonely trail. She had thought her life was over, that she would never trust or love again. And yet here she was, standing in a sun-washed room with a good man who looked at her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, Zach, I'll marry you." Joy and relief washed over his face as he slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "It was my grandmother's," he explained, seeing her admiring it. "My mother gave it to me before she passed, said to save it for when I found the right woman." "It's perfect," Francesca assured him, curling her fingers to catch the light on the diamond. "Everything is perfect." Zach drew her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that stole her breath and made her heart race. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, he rested his forehead against hers. "When?" he asked simply. Francesca considered. "The school term ends in December for the Christmas holiday. We could marry then, start the new year together." "Too long," Zach groaned dramatically, making her laugh. "But I suppose I can wait. I've waited 6 years to feel this way again. I can manage 2 more months. Besides," Francesca added practically, "it will give us time to prepare. I'll need a dress and there will be arrangements to make." She glanced around the house. "And I might have some ideas for improvements here." "Already redecorating," Zach teased, but his eyes were warm with approval. "This is your home now too, or it will be soon. Change whatever you like." Home. The word resonated in Francesca's heart. She had left Boston seeking a new beginning, never imagining she would find not just a place to belong but a love so deep and true it made all her past sorrows seem worthwhile. "Take me on a tour," she requested. "I want to see everything." Hand in hand, they explored the small ranch house, the cozy kitchen, the bedroom with its handmade quilt, the small study lined with more bookshelves, and the spare room that Zach nervously suggested might make a nice nursery someday. Afterward, they sat on the porch swing, watching the sun begin its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Francesca's head rested on Zach's shoulder, his arm around her waist, her engagement ring catching the fading light. "Happy?" he asked softly. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "You, beyond words," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple, "though I'm already dreading having to leave you in town tonight. 2 months, she reminded him. Then you'll never have to leave me again. 2 months, he agreed with a sigh. I've marked off the days on my calendar already. News of their engagement spread quickly through Kingston. Most people expressed delight and approval, though Francesca noticed that Sheriff Hayes avoided her even more assiduously than before, clearly uncomfortable with the reminder of his failure to protect the citizens under his care. The ladies of the town immediately began planning the wedding, volunteering everything from baked goods to decorations for the church. Martha Miller and Eliza took charge of Francesca's dress, ordering fabric from Carson City, and consulting pattern books borrowed from the dressmaker in the next town over. With each passing day, Francesca's excitement grew, tempered only by occasional bouts of anxiety about the physical aspects of marriage. Her experience with the Outlaws had left her with a fear of intimacy that she had not fully acknowledged even to herself. But as the wedding approached, she found herself increasingly worried about her ability to be a proper wife to Zach in all respects. Finally, 2 weeks before the wedding, she gathered her courage and confided in Eliza, who had become not just a landlady but a dear friend and mother figure. "I'm afraid," she admitted as they sat in Eliza's parlor, teacups cradled in their hands, "afraid that when the time comes I'll remember them, that I won't be able to bear Zach's touch even though I love him." Eliza's expression was sympathetic but not pitying. "Have you talked to Zach about this?" Francesca shook her head, ashamed. "How can I? He's been so patient, so understanding. The last thing I want is for him to think I don't desire him." "But do you?" Eliza asked gently. "Desire him, I mean." The question made Francesca blush, but she considered it honestly. "Yes," she said finally. "When he kisses me, when he holds me close, I feel I want more. But then I start thinking about what comes next, and I panic." Eliza set down her teacup and took Francesca's hands in hers. "Listen to me, child. What those men did to you was not intimacy. It was violence, using something sacred as a weapon. What you will share with Zach is entirely different, an expression of love between two people who have chosen each other." "I know that in my head," Francesca said. "But my heart, my body, they're not so easily convinced." "Then you must talk to Zach," Eliza insisted. "That man loves you with his whole heart. He would rather wait a year or cut off his right arm than cause you pain or fear." Deep down, Francesca knew Eliza was right. Her relationship with Zach was built on honesty and trust. Keeping these fears from him was a disservice to both of them. The opportunity to speak with him came the following Sunday. After church, they went for a walk by the creek, enjoying the crisp winter air and the privacy afforded by the bare trees. "You've been quiet today," Zach observed as they sat on a fallen log, his arm around her shoulders to ward off the chill. "Is something troubling you?" Francesca took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I need to talk to you about something important, about our wedding night." Zach tensed slightly beside her but kept his voice calm. "I'm listening." She couldn't look at him as she spoke, instead focusing on the creek bubbling over stones. "I'm afraid that that I might not be able to." The words stuck in her throat. "That what happened with those men might come between us," Zach finished for her, his voice gentle but matter of fact, relieved that she didn't have to explain further. Francesca nodded. "Yes." Zach was quiet for a long moment and she risked a glance at his face. His expression was thoughtful, not angry or disappointed as she had feared. "Francesca," he said finally, turning to face her fully, "I want you to hear me clearly. I love you, all of you, including the parts that were hurt, the parts that are still healing. When we marry, yes, I hope to share physical intimacy with you, but only when you're ready, only in ways that bring you pleasure, not pain or fear." Tears welled in Francesca's eyes at the sincerity in his voice. "But what if I'm never ready? What if I can never be a proper wife to you?" "Then we'll find our own way to be husband and wife," Zach said simply. "There's more than one way to express love, to be intimate. I didn't ask you to marry me for what might happen in our bedroom. I asked because I want to build a life with you, to wake up beside you each morning and fall asleep beside you each night, to raise children with you if we're blessed with them, to grow old watching sunsets from that porch swing." Relief and love washed over Francesca in equal measure. She leaned forward, capturing his lips in a kiss that conveyed everything she couldn't find words for: her gratitude, her love, her hope for their future together. When they broke apart, Zach cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had spilled onto her cheeks. "We'll go as slowly as you need," he promised. "And you'll always be able to tell me to stop, no matter when or where or why. I give you my word." "I believe you," Francesca whispered, and she did. In that moment, she knew with certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with patience and understanding and love. The wedding took place on a bright December day, with the church filled to capacity with what seemed like the entire population of Kingston and the surrounding ranches. Francesca walked down the aisle in a gown of ivory satin with lace trim, her hair adorned with a wreath of winter greenery and dried flowers. Eliza, who gave her away in the absence of her father, wept openly as she placed Francesca's hand in Zach's. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. Reverend Parker spoke of the sacred bond of marriage, of the commitment to stand by one another through all of life's joys and sorrows. Francesca and Zach exchanged simple vows and rings, hers the delicate gold band that matched her engagement ring, his a broader band that he later admitted he had practiced wearing while working so it wouldn't feel strange on his hand. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Parker declared, beaming at them. "Mr. Montero, you may kiss your bride." Zach's kiss was tender but restrained, mindful of their audience. But the look in his eyes when he drew back promised much more when they were alone. The celebration afterward was held at the town hall, with tables groaning under the weight of potluck dishes contributed by every household. There was music from a local fiddle player, dancing, and more good wishes than Francesca could count. She was introduced to distant neighbors she hadn't yet met, received advice from every married woman in a 50-mile radius, and danced until her feet ached not just with Zach but with Tommy Wilson, Doc Miller, and even young Will Peterson, who blushed furiously throughout their brief turn around the floor. As the afternoon waned, Eliza pulled her aside for a private moment. "Are you happy, my dear?" "Completely," Francesca assured her, embracing the older woman. "Thank you for everything, for taking me in, for your wisdom, for being the mother I needed when I was at my lowest." "It was my privilege," Eliza said, her eyes misty. "You brought light back into this old heart of mine." She pressed something into Francesca's hand, a small vial of lavender oil. "For relaxation," she explained with a wink. "Useful in many situations." Francesca blushed, but tucked the vial into her pocket with a grateful smile. Soon after, she and Zach made their goodbyes, enduring the traditional teasing and well wishes as they climbed into the buggy for the journey to their home, now shared in truth as well as promise. As they drove away from town, snowflakes began to fall, delicate and sparkling in the fading light. Zach tucked the lap robe more securely around Francesca's legs, his touch lingering. "Second thoughts?" he asked lightly, but she could hear the hint of genuine concern beneath the teasing. "Not one," she assured him, leaning into his side. "Take me home, husband." The ranch looked different in the twilight, the windows of the house glowing with welcoming light. Tommy Wilson, who had slipped away from the celebration early, had clearly been busy. Smoke rose from the chimney, and when they entered the house, they found a fire blazing in the hearth, the table set for two with the good china Zach's mother had left him, and a pot of stew simmering on the stove. "That boy," Zach said, shaking his head in fond exasperation. "Always thinking ahead." A note on the table informed them that Tommy would be staying in the bunkhouse with the other ranch hands for the next few days, giving the newlyweds privacy. He had also, the note mentioned, already fed and watered the livestock for the evening. "Remind me to give him a raise," Zach remarked as he helped Francesca remove her cloak. They ate the simple meal by the fire, talking quietly about the day, the ceremony, the celebration, the friends who had shared their joy. It was comfortable, familiar, yet underlaid with a new awareness, a tension that grew as the evening progressed. Finally, Zach set aside his empty plate and reached for Francesca's hand. "Would you like to see our bedroom? I've made some changes since you were here last." Nervousness fluttered in Francesca's stomach, but curiosity overcame it. "Yes, I'd like that." He led her down the short hallway to the bedroom, opening the door with a slight flourish. Francesca gasped in delight. The room had been transformed since her last visit. New curtains hung at the windows, a soft rug covered the wooden floor, and the bed, previously a simple affair with a functional quilt, now boasted a beautiful coverlet in shades of blue and green, with matching pillows. "Eliza helped," Zach admitted, watching her reaction. "Said every woman deserves a pretty bedroom." "It's perfect," Francesca said, genuinely pleased. She turned to him, summoning her courage. "And now, Mr. Montero, I believe it's customary for a husband to help his wife out of her wedding gown." A slow smile spread across Zach's face. "Whatever the lady wishes," he murmured, stepping closer. His fingers were surprisingly deft on the tiny buttons that ran down the back of her dress, though he admitted as he worked that he had practiced on one of his shirts, much to Tommy's amusement. The intimacy of the moment, his breath warm on her neck, his fingers occasionally brushing her skin, sent shivers through Francesca that were not entirely from fear. When the last button was undone, Zach stepped back, giving her space. "I'll turn around if you prefer privacy," he offered. "Or I can help you with the rest." Francesca considered for a moment, then made her decision. "Help me," she said softly. "But can we keep the lamp lit? I don't want darkness tonight." Understanding flashed in his eyes. "Of course, whatever makes you comfortable." With infinite gentleness and patience, Zach helped her out of her wedding finery, the satin gown, the petticoats, the corset that Martha Miller had insisted was necessary, though Francesca rarely wore one in her daily life. Each layer removed brought them closer to the moment of truth, yet Francesca found her anxiety lessening rather than growing. This was Zach, she reminded herself. Zach, who had found her broken on the trail and hunted down her attackers. Zach, who had courted her with books and wildflowers, who had rebuilt his house and his life with her in mind. Zach, who had promised to wait as long as she needed, even if that meant forever. When she stood before him in just her thin chemise, Zach's eyes darkened with desire, but his voice remained steady. "You are so beautiful," he said simply, "and so very brave." He turned away to remove his own clothes, giving her the option of averting her eyes, which she didn't take. She watched as he shed his suit jacket, vest, and shirt, revealing a torso muscled from years of ranch work, scattered with scars that told stories she would learn in time. When he was down to his underclothes, he turned back to her. "We can just sleep if you prefer," he reminded her. "Or I can hold you. Nothing more has to happen tonight." Francesca stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "I want more," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I want everything with you, Zach. I might need to go slowly, I might need to stop and start again, but I want to try." The joy that lit his face was worth any amount of fear or discomfort she might face. "Then we'll try," he agreed, drawing her into his arms. Together. Their first night as husband and wife was not the passionate consummation depicted in the romance novels Francesca had secretly read as a girl. There were awkward moments, hesitations, even tears at one point when a particular touch triggered a memory she thought she had buried. But there was also tenderness, discovery, and a deep, abiding sense of safety in Zach's arms. They did not achieve full intimacy that night, but they found other ways to express their love, to bring each other pleasure. And as they lay together afterward, Francesca's head pillowed on Zach's chest, his heart beat strong and steady beneath her ear. She felt not disappointment but hope that in time, with patience and trust, she would heal completely. "Thank you," she whispered into the quiet room. "For what?" Zach asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "For finding me, for saving me, for loving me enough to wait." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Always," he promised, "for as long as we both shall live." Winter settled over Kingston, blanketing the valley in snow and bringing shorter days and longer nights. Francesca continued teaching, now riding to school each day on a gentle mare named Daisy that had been Zach's wedding gift to her. The children quickly adjusted to calling her Mrs. Montero instead of Miss Dawson, though they occasionally forgot, especially the youngest ones. Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm. Francesca rose early with Zach, preparing breakfast before he went out to tend the livestock. She would then ride to town for the school day, returning home in the afternoon to grade papers, prepare dinner, and help with whatever ranch chores she could manage. The work was hard but satisfying, so different from her sheltered life in Boston that sometimes she marveled at how easily she had adapted. Each night, she and Zach would sit before the fire, reading or talking or simply enjoying the comfortable silence between them. And each night, they would retire to their bedroom, where slowly, gently, Zach helped Francesca reclaim her body and her desires from the shadows of her trauma. It wasn't always easy. There were nights when memories would overwhelm her, when Zach's touch, however loving, would trigger panic instead of pleasure. But he was endlessly patient, never showing frustration or disappointment, always willing to stop and simply hold her until the fear passed. And there were other nights, increasingly frequent, as winter deepened, when Francesca found herself responding to her husband with a passion that surprised and delighted them both. On a snowy evening in January, 2 months after their wedding, they finally achieved the full physical union of marriage, and Francesca wept afterward, not from pain or fear but from the overwhelming joy of being truly whole again. "I love you," she told Zach that night, the words seeming inadequate to express the depth of her feelings. "I love you more than I have words to say." "Then show me," he suggested, a spark of mischief in his eyes. "Actions speak louder than words, or so I'm told." And she did, initiating their lovemaking for the first time, finding confidence and power in her ability to bring him pleasure as he had brought her. Spring came to Nevada, turning the hills green and filling the creek with snowmelt. Francesca's first school year as Mrs. Montero concluded successfully, with all her students advancing to the next level and several parents commenting on the improvement in their children's education. "You've done wonders with that school," Zach told her proudly as they rode home together after the end-of-year celebration. "The whole town is talking about it." "I love teaching," Francesca admitted, "but I've been thinking I might ask the school board for a replacement at least for a year or so." Zach reined his horse to a stop, looking at her in surprise. "Why, has someone complained? Are you unhappy?" "No, nothing like that," she assured him quickly. "It's just that. Well, I might not be in a condition to teach by the fall term." His brow furrowed in confusion, then cleared suddenly as understanding dawned. "Are you saying—" Francesca nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "Doc Miller confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby, Zach. Sometime in November, he thinks." Joy suffused Zach's face, so pure and complete that it brought tears to Francesca's eyes. In one fluid movement, he dismounted and lifted her from her horse, swinging her in a gentle circle before setting her carefully on her feet. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. He placed his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you happy?" she asked, though the answer was written clearly on his face. "Beyond happy," he assured her, pulling her into his embrace. "I thought my life was complete when you agreed to marry me, but this is a miracle I didn't dare hope for." They stood together on the trail, the horses grazing patiently nearby, the spring sun warm on their faces as they shared this private moment of joy. Francesca thought back to that terrible day nearly a year ago when she had lain broken and despairing on a dusty trail, certain her life was over before it had truly begun. How wrong she had been. From that darkest moment had come this brightest light, a man who loved her completely, a home, a community that had embraced her, and now a child growing beneath her heart. The outlaws who had attacked her had sought to destroy her, but instead they had inadvertently set her on the path to the greatest happiness she had ever known. "What are you thinking?" Zach asked, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "That sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best," she replied honestly. "If I hadn't been on that stagecoach, if it hadn't been attacked, we might never have met," Zach finished for her, "though I like to think fate would have found another way to bring us together." Francesca smiled up at him, this man who had found her at her lowest and helped her rise higher than she had ever dreamed possible. "I think you're right," she agreed. "Some things are simply meant to be." They remounted their horses and continued toward home, toward their future together. As they crested the hill that overlooked their ranch, Francesca felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The memory of those terrible days would never completely fade, but neither would it define her. She was Francesca Montero, now teacher, wife, soon-to-be mother, survivor. And she was exactly where she was meant to be. On a crisp November morning, with the first snow of the season dusting the ground outside, Francesca gave birth to their son, a healthy, robust boy with Zach's gray eyes and a shock of dark hair. They named him James, after Francesca's father, with Thomas as a middle name in honor of Tommy Wilson, who had become like family to them both. "He's perfect," Zach whispered, cradling his newborn son with tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "Just like his mother." Francesca, exhausted but radiant after 12 hours of labor, reached out to touch the downy head of her child. "He has your chin, I think, and definitely your lungs." As if to prove her point, little James let out a lusty wail, causing both parents to laugh. Martha Miller, who had assisted with the birth while her husband stood by in case of complications, smiled at the new family from her place by the wash basin. "He's a fine, strong boy," she agreed. "You did wonderfully, Francesca." Life with a newborn proved to be both more challenging and more rewarding than either Francesca or Zach had anticipated. Nights were broken by James's hungry cries. Days were a blur of feedings and diaper changes and stolen moments of sleep. But there were also perfect quiet hours when Francesca would sit in the rocking chair Zach had made, nursing their son while watching the snow fall outside the window, or when Zach would walk the floor with James against his shoulder, singing the cowboy songs he had learned as a young man riding the range. The town welcomed James Montero, with the same enthusiasm they had shown his parents. Gifts appeared regularly on their doorstep: tiny knitted booties, a handcrafted cradle from the carpenter in Carson City, a silver rattle from Eliza that had belonged to her own son, long grown and moved to California. Spring brought new growth to the ranch, not just in the land, which greened and blossomed with the warming weather, but in their family. James thrived, growing and changing so quickly that Francesca sometimes felt she could actually see it happening before her eyes. His first smile, first laugh, first time rolling over each milestone was celebrated and recorded in the journal she kept for him. Zach expanded the ranch, buying an adjoining property when the elderly owner decided to move east to live with his daughter. The additional land meant more work, but also more prosperity, allowing them to hire another hand to help Tommy, who at 19 had become Zach's foreman. Francesca did not return to teaching that fall, choosing instead to remain home with James. But she didn't abandon education entirely. Once a week, she hosted an informal reading circle for the women of Kingston, many of whom had limited schooling. In the ranch house's cozy parlor, they read everything from Shakespeare to modern novels, discussing ideas and expanding their horizons while their children played together under Francesca's watchful eye. On the anniversary of the day Zach had found her on the trail, Francesca walked out to the creek alone, leaving James napping under Eliza's supervision. She sat on the bank, trailing her fingers in the cold water, reflecting on the journey of the past 2 years. The physical scars of her ordeal had faded completely. The emotional ones remained, but had transformed from raw, bleeding wounds to the kind of healed injuries that only ached when the weather changed, metaphorically speaking. She could go weeks now without thinking of that terrible day, and when memories did surface, they no longer had the power to overwhelm her. She heard footsteps behind her and knew without looking that it was Zach. He sat beside her on the grassy bank, not speaking, simply offering his presence. 2 years ago today, Francesca said finally. You saved my life. Zach shook his head, taking her hand. You saved your own life, Francesca. You survived until I found you. You fought to recover. You rebuilt yourself from the inside out. He pressed a kiss to her knuckles. I just had the good fortune to be there to witness it. Francesca leaned into his side, drawing strength and comfort from his solid presence. We saved each other, I think. They sat together as the sun began its descent, casting golden light across the flowing water. In the distance, they could hear Tommy calling the cattle, the familiar sounds of the ranch preparing for evening. We should head back, Zach said eventually. Eliza will be wanting to return to town before dark. As they walked hand in hand toward the house, Francesca reflected on how completely her life had changed since that fateful day on the trail. From the depths of despair and violation, she had risen to find a love and purpose greater than any she had known before. The outlaws who had sought to destroy her had instead set her on the path to her greatest happiness. I've been thinking, Zach said as they approached the house, where they could see Eliza through the window, dandling James on her knee. Maybe we should expand the house next spring. Add another bedroom or two. Francesca glanced at him, raising an eyebrow. Are you planning on taking in boarders, Mr. Montero? A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not exactly, but James might need siblings someday. A boy needs brothers and sisters to grow up with, don't you think? Warmth bloomed in Francesca's chest. I think that's a wonderful idea, she agreed, squeezing his hand. Though perhaps we should wait until James is walking before we start work on a sibling. Zach laughed, pulling her close for a quick kiss. Whatever you say, Mrs. Montero. I'm a patient man, remember. That you are, she acknowledged, smiling up at him. And I love you for it, for everything. And I love you, he replied simply, always and forever. Together, they climbed the porch steps and entered their home, where their son greeted them with a gurgle of delight and outstretched arms. As Francesca gathered James to her chest, his small body warm and solid against her heart, she felt the completeness of her healing, the fullness of her joy. The trail had led her here, to this moment, to this family, and she would be forever grateful for the journey, with all its darkness and light, that had brought her home.